You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, John Hall in New York.
And me, Charles Foley in Minneapolis.
Charles, I know you'd be excited by the post on the website this week about another luminous mammal. What did you think?
Yes, I was actually very excited about that. For our listeners who don't know what we're talking about, there was a chap called Mike, don't know what his last name is, so it's just Mike, a post uploaded onto mammalwatching.com, which described how he went on a night walk in Ecuador along the Napo River and discovered that a small species of mouse opossum called the Robinson's mouse opossum glows bright pink under UV light. And you can see the pictures on the website, and it's really pretty cool. Now, I'm sure most regular listeners will know that I find this phenomenon about fluorescence in mammals fascinating, and I keep on banging on about it. But what's happening is that more people are pointing UV lights at different mammal species, mostly specimens in museums or zoos. And as a result, more and more mammals are now being found to have some level of fluorescence in their hair or their skin. And the list now includes hedgehogs, Tasmanian devils, porcupines, polar bears, some species of bats, platypus, dormice, and a whole range of others. And interestingly, so far, fluorescence has been found to be particularly widespread in nocturnal mammals as well as marsupials. And as I've mentioned in the past, no one knows if there's any real adaptive value to this trait or if it's just an evolutionary side effect. And indeed, there's a growing belief that fluorescence may not actually have any biological function at all and is actually just a side effect of chemicals that are present in the hair and skin. But what's particularly interesting to me is that while some mammals have only parts of their body which glow, so for instance, their quills or their underparts or their faces, in other animals like the Robinson's mouse opossum or the spring hare or northern flying squirrel, the whole body glows and they glow a psychedelic green or purple or pink. And these species would be really cool to see in the wild using UV light. And I was thinking that given that many mammal watchers are out and about at night looking for unusual mammal species, I think it's a great opportunity for the mammal watching community to add to the collective knowledge about this phenomenon. So I encourage everyone to get a UV torch and take it out with you on night walks. And if you want to try this, I'd personally recommend getting a fairly powerful torch that can shine some distance. So I use one called the UV Beast V3. I believe it's probably listed down somewhere on mammalwatching.com under the torches, etc. But anyway, it can be fairly easily ordered online. And anyway, I would like to lay down the gauntlet to all mammal watchers to go out and see how many species we, as a community, can add to the ever-growing list of fluorescent mammals.
Fascinating. It is very interesting. I do laugh. I know you love it, and I do too. It's cool. And of course, if you can't get a UV beast, what you could do is next time you're small mammal trapping, don't let the things go straight away. Take them to your local nightclub, wait for them to put the UV lights on and see what happens.
There you go. Yeah, the practical approach.
Very good.
Yeah. And how about you, John?
I'm good, Charles. I'm just wanting to mention to everyone that although I've been shamelessly promoting our article on Mongabay, I'll just promote it a bit more in case people listening to podcast didn't see it. But Charles and I, mainly Charles, wrote a kind of an opinion piece on Mongabay, and of course it's about mammal watching and why it's going to save the world. We sort of looked at some of the case studies around the world of where mammal watching, particularly in private land and community lands, has made an impact to people's livelihoods, and it seems to be helping conservation. We talk about the echidna we saw in West Papua, but we talk about other things as well. And Mongabay published that a couple of weeks ago, and it's about why, for rare mammals, why observing means conserving. And it does link into several of the recent podcasts we've had. It also links into the one coming up right now. So I'll put it in the notes in case anyone hasn't seen it or would like to.
Yeah, indeed. I recommend everyone to go and read it. And frankly, I'm a little surprised that the birders haven't written much about this because, in many places they're leading the way with bird watching money coming in and revolutionizing the tourism industries. But anyway, mammal watching is getting there first for once.
No, for what? As always now. Come on, thermal scopes, mammal watching. This mammal, we're leading the way. Birders can follow in our distant footsteps.
There you go.
Sorry, birders, I'm only joking. Right.
Actually, I should point out that the guy who actually discovered the mouse opossum that fluoresces in Ecuador, he's actually a birder as well.
Oh,
So,
right, well, there you go. The exception that proves the rule.
So our guest today is Dr. Rodney Jackson, who is the director of the Snow Leopard Conservancy. Rodney is widely considered the leading world expert on the snow leopard, having devoted over 40 years to researching and conserving this elusive cat in South and Central Asia. In 1981, he received the Rolex Award for Enterprise and launched a pioneering 4-year study of snow leopards in the Nepalese Himalayas, becoming the first person to conduct radio tracking studies on this endangered species. In 2000, he and Darla Hillard established the Snow Leopard Conservancy, an NGO dedicated to using grassroots interventions to reduce conflict between local communities and snow leopards. He has trained biologists across most of snow leopards' 12 range countries and provided technical support in the establishment of several new protected areas in Central Asia. He has numerous publications, including the cover story in National Geographic in 1986, and has been a finalist for the Indianapolis Prize, which is considered the Nobel Prize for Conservation, no less than 5 times. Rodney, welcome to the program. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Wow, what a CV. I'm honored to meet you, Rodney. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, yes, to talk about snow leopards, which I love doing.
Yeah, so do we. Rodney, so could you start, please, by telling us how you became interested in wildlife?
Yeah, well, I was born in South Africa on the gold fields, and from a very early age, probably 6, 7 years old that I remember, I've always been fascinated by animals. And so that started me off. My family moved to Zimbabwe when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and we lived on the outskirts of, which was then Salisbury, now Harare. And I would go across the road into we called a flay, which is actually a grassland, a riparian grassland. And I would be tracking duiker, antelope, and leopards. And so, my dream was always that I would go back to Africa and I would work on conservation there. I had a summer job in Kafue National Park that really exposed me to it. It was very interesting because the park had just been set up. This was about 1962, 63. And he sent me out on a bicycle to go and collect skulls because, at that point we had very little information on predation, which age groups, which species were being killed. And he said, well, I will teach you how to take the skull from lion kills. And I kind of said, I don't know how I want to do that. But I did learn a lot from that because I learned to read the posture and the signs that lions would give, and they could pretty well tell you whether they're going to let you do it or not do it by their actions. Anyway, that was all the start of it. And because it was the winds of change happening, I really realized if I were to stay in Africa, I would have to get a graduate degree and stay ahead of the game. So I came to the U.S. and my dream was always to study under Stalker Leopold, the son of Aldo Leopold. And I was lucky enough, they said, get to the North America, we can talk about it. So I got to North America, and I had the wonderful opportunity to do a master's degree under him. And it was during the master's degree that I attended the first CAT conference that was held in Southern California. And a lot of luminaries were there, people like George Schala. And I did go up to him and I said, I'd love to get you ideas. I want to go back to Africa and study leopards. And he sort of looked at me And he said, well, what education do you have? And I said, well, I'm getting my master's. He said, well, go away and get your PhD and then talk to me. And I was totally flummoxed by this, totally flummoxed. I don't know what to say. I sort of went away. And being me, I guess I got a little reactionary. I said, well, screw you. I don't have to have a PhD to study snow leopards. And I'm going to get a better photograph than you had gotten published in National Geographic, which of course I never did because his photograph was a wonderful one. But I persuaded an insurance company to give me a little bit of money to go to Nepal and try and photograph those cats in a far western part. And, you know, I arrived at an opportune time in many ways because the park were just being set up in Nepal. And I had a friend who was being appointed as chief ecologist. And so they were certainly helpful. And they looked at me and said, well, snow leopards, are you crazy? No way in hell. You never see them. There's very few of them. And I said, well, okay, just tell me where in Nepal you think the best places are. And they told me, and I went there. I spent, 3 months. I never saw a cat, but they would come outside my tent almost once a week anyway, leave their tracks, scrape nearby, not make a sound. I wouldn't wake up. I'd never see them. But I did interact a lot with the local herders and the local villagers. This was up in a remote valley. They couldn't get their livestock up there because the trails are so bad, but it was the area that they went on their winter hunt to get blue sheep, which is a prey of snow leopard. And they wanted blue sheep for the meat because, you know, they at that time of year, it was end of the year, it was their Losar celebrations for Buddhists. And at that time, Buddhists are kind of had a bit of freedom to kill animals. And I also found out that there was one or two individuals that were trapping snow leopards, and I found the furs of them. So I was sort of able to get some sense of what the impact was based all on sign and, you know, interpreting the marking patterns of snow leopards and the tracks, never seen them, but seeing kills and seeing a carcass that, you know, sort of set me off. Well, should I really go back to Africa and have a difficulty of finding a job, or should I just see if I can study snow leopards? So that's sort of how it all started, a long story.
Why did you particularly choose snow leopards? Because, as you've just pointed out, they were considered to be extremely difficult to see, let alone study. So what was it that led you to that particular species?
Oh, the beauty of that cat. I mean, it's just such a, and George's picture is just so superb of that cat, the female sitting up on below a cliff in Pakistan. And she had a cub, a young cub, and he got just wonderful pictures. The first, you know, were published ones. And it was very sad because a couple of months later, I had heard that she had actually been killed by one of the local landlords. And that really set me off, thinking of, you know, Asia was just being neglected, snow leopards. Naively, I thought I could do something because I'd been to, snow leopard area and seen the sign. But frankly, the funding was a big problem, and it was really Rolex winning that award for enterprise back in '81 that made it all possible. Because funding was a critical thing that I did need. I had, offers of having the project approved by the Nepalese government. Actually, had to be approved by the King of Nepal, which he eventually did do, and it enabled us to do that work. So I don't know. It's just I would say I'm very lucky. I would also say if I knew the difficulties of studying snow leopards, I would never have taken this on. I was totally naive.
Isn't that so often the case?
Yes.
You touched already on how you started with the snow leopards, but could you tell us some more about that work in the early days? How you went about it?
Yes, I knew I was introduced to the tiger researchers who were just starting to work in Nepal on big cats. And so I benefited a lot from their advice. And the Smithsonian Institution helped me get equipment over to Nepal and, help with the logistics. I also had contacts with a group that was a tourism-based group, Mountain Travel, that would take people on trips. And they were able to set me up with some Sherpas and a trekking agency because I had to, basically the study required that we would go into the field for anywhere from 2 to 6 or 9 months, and we had to be completely self-contained. There was no food out there except we could buy some potatoes. That was really it. All our equipment had to be hauled in. And the very first time in, when we launched it upon getting the Rolex funding, it took us a month to walk to the study area because in that time there was no roads across Nepal, and so we really had to go to the Indian border and then head north for the Tibetan border, which was our project area in the Mugu district. And we had carrying all those food. Everything was kind of eaten by the time we got to Dolfu, so our base. And then from the base, we still had a 2-day hike, which is only maybe about 7 miles up into the inner gorge. And it was sort of an enclave area that was just a very wonderful place for snow leopard. Later, I would find out it's probably the highest density of cats in the world. So all of those challenges was like, I guess, mounting a big expedition to climb a peak, but I never went to the peak. I was always below that.
And where would you stay? Would you stay with local communities, or did you stay in tents, or how did it work?
Well, when we first arrived, we were able to get a summer hermitage house of the local Lama and stay there. And we were waiting for the snow to melt. So we went in October, and that year turned out to be a very, very heavy snowfall that completely cut off access to the upper gorge. So we were basically staying above the village for 3 months. We could watch the avalanches across the river. We'd see wildlife getting swept away. All sorts of things happened. And then when it cleared, we were able to go in. And actually, I just ran into all sorts of snow leopard sign. And it only took, I thought it would take me a month or 2 months to live trap a snow leopard and fit a collar. In fact, it took 2 days. I just
Wow.
think we were very, very lucky. It was sort of like studying a ghost.
Yeah.
Is that the first snow leopard that you laid eyes on?
Yes, in the wild, yes.
Wow.
Amazing.
And how long did you radio track them for?
Well, we tracked altogether 5 cats. There were 3 males and 2 females for varying times. The shortest time was probably about 6 months. The longest time, 2.5 years. We changed the collars on one cat 3 times, actually. But we very rarely saw them. In the first few years, we were lucky to get a glimpse of a snow leopard maybe twice a year. And in the team, there was myself, my wife Darla, 2 Sherpas, a Nepalese counterpart. So there were a lot of eyes looking for the cats. They were just superb at hiding themselves, not showing themselves. And, their camouflage is wonderful. Also, we were beginning to learn where not to look or where to look. So it took a while to get that down. But even since that time, I don't know, I've probably seen snow leopards maybe 40 times. But you think of 40 times in almost 50 years of research, it's not a lot. It's still once a year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What were some of the early things you discovered in the studies?
I think 2 things, really. Number one, that although snow leopards were solitary and were, rarely seen, they in fact had a very powerful repertoire of leaving sign and scent and markings in their environment. So they were in close communication with all the other cats there. And they would know where, I think they would know anyway, where the other individuals were. And that really enabled males that were, challenging the dominant resident to access that same territory, how to avoid him and begin to mark and hope at some point that the marking really would lead to land tenure recognition, if I put it that way. And what we did is we decided, okay, since we don't see the cats, since it's very hard to get a location, maybe 1 or 2 locations every day, working very hard, 6, 7 hours because of the terrain, let's look at sign. So we set up a transect up a major ridgeline that went from the river up high to about 16, 17,000 feet. And we knew the cats went up that regularly. They really like to walk along ridge lines, and especially ridge lines that came down to river junctions. That just seemed to be their post office, let's put it that way. So we marked and mapped every sign that was left, and we'd go up whenever a radio collared cat crossed that transect or went up it, or every 2 weeks. And we would look and see which sign had been remarked. We would map all the new sign. And what we found out is that snow leopards have what we call relic sign marking. And that is where they repeatedly mark and overmark existing sign left by other cats. And I think the theory behind this is the more you can leave your scent at the site, the more ownership it gives you of that particular area. So we found something like, if I remember correctly, this is a long time ago, but about 45 or 50% of all scrapes that we found were remarked scrapes that could go back generations of cats in some cases.
And how many snow leopards do you estimate were in that valley at the time?
We estimated somewhere between 5 and 10 or 12. That's counting cubs. So maybe 8 or 9 without cubs, something like that, which is pretty dense. And it was a small area. So this is a number per 100 square kilometers.
And when the animals came into contact, if they ever did, was there conflict? Would males kill cubs and things?
We never observed that conflict directly. However, a number of the males, the adult male in particular that we had a lot of facial scratches and stuff. So he was obviously in some conflict with it. But, some of that does happen during mating, more likely an encounter with another male.
Right.
You mentioned that over the course of your lifetime, you've only seen about 40 snow leopards. However, I imagine you've had some incredible sightings over the years. Can you tell us about some of your highlight sightings?
Well, I've been always looking to see a snow leopard hunt. And it wasn't until maybe 2006 or 7 that I saw that. And that was in Ladakh. When we talk about conservation, I think community conservation made such a difference. But in Ladakh, now you can be guaranteed to see snow leopards when you go there in winter. And it was one of the trips that I was on. A female had 2 cubs, and we watched them perhaps from about, I'd say 300 yards away, something like that. The cubs were playing. It's clear that she was looking to hunt. There was some blue sheep up above her. And she was obviously getting a little bit agitated with her cubs, and she went up to them, swatted one, and they just lay down by that rock. And then she took a circuitous route upwards. In my experience, snow leopard hunts that are successful almost always happen from above, by a cat being up above the prey, seeing the prey, has to come close, something like 30, 40 meters away, yards away, or closer, in order to be able to actually make contact and kill their prey. And so it's a rush down the hill. And here was this female doing totally the opposite by using boulders to sneak behind. And she got so close to this female blue sheep. There was maybe 3 or 4 in the group. It was a female group, not a male group. And they were kind of not quite looking at one another, but they were opposite sides of a boulder. I mean, literally 5 yards apart at the most. And they were circling. And I'm sure the blue sheep was definitely aware something was going on. The cat wasn't quite sure where the sheep was. Suddenly there was a change in the wind direction. And that sheep got, I think, the full odor of the female, and just took off. And I've never seen a snow leopard come around the corner and clearly look disappointed. The first thing she seemed to do was to make a scrape and then go back to her cubs. So that's the only hunt I've ever personally seen. People have this one wonderful one that may or may not be on the web. I'm not sure, but it was by a bird watching group that had gone to Ladakh to see snow leopards and do birding. And the leader of the group had a very nice 35 millimeter camera, and he just captured it all on stills that you can put together. And it's a classic hunt for anybody. Somebody by the name of Riley.
Adam Riley. Yeah, he runs Rock Jumper, or used to run Rock Jumper. I know him. Yeah.
Yeah, just wonderful, you know. But even now, there are there's reports on hunts, but they all come from telemetry data after the fact with satellite collars, and the cat being, obviously restricted to that area as it consumes its meal. And so it's all interpreted from side, and that's very difficult to do.
And I have seen hunts where the snow leopard goes for a blue sheep, and both of them plummet fairly large distances off a cliff and hit the ground, and they keep on fighting. So you'd have thought that it would actually do quite a lot of damage to the cat. Some of these falls.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure it did. I've never been able to find out more about it, but I suspect that cat could not have survived a fall like that. And, even going back, I can remember from the beginning, in the late 70s when I got the interest in snow leopards, there were quite a few reports from northern India and Central Asia of snow leopards hunting ibex on the edge of a cliff and knocking the prey over and both dying. It's not uncommon.
Wow. What other wildlife have you seen in the snow leopard areas?
Well, the other wildlife, of course, red panda at the upper end of the forested areas, musk deer, which are also very shy because of the persecution. And in many ways, it was musk deer that got me the attention of the national parks, because on my first trip in, before the Rolex Award, I documented the annual musk deer hunting of that village, where that was the main source, well, one of the key sources of their income, because musk was worth more than gold in those days for sure. So musk deer, and then in Tibet you have a number of different species, antelope that come to the edge of hill slopes or broken areas and occasionally get taken. Well, yak, of course, beyond the capacity of snow leopards, except for the young calves.
Yeah.
And even then, it's probably very rare. Wild ass in Tibet on the plains. What else? Ibex, of course. There's several different deer up in the Russian and Mongolian regions in the Altai.
Yeah. What about lynx and the blue bears?
Oh, God, lynx. Oh, I'd give gold to see another lynx. I've only seen one, and that was in southern Tibet on a trip when we were driving. So the lynx took off pretty quickly. And it was just such a wonderful sight on the plains with the carrageenan bushes and the snow peaks in the back. I mean, I'll never forget it. And the other one you mentioned was the bear. Never saw bear. I've seen their sign in Tibet and in northern Nepal, but I've never seen one.
Interesting. They're seeing quite lynx now. They see quite often in Ladakh, in Hemis. There's a spot where Charles and I actually looked and didn't see one, but they do see them regularly now on trips as a sort of add-on for the snow leopard watching.
Yeah, they are seeing them regularly. When we did our camera trapping, we got a number of images of them, and just missed seeing them by once, I guess, one time. But this is great. You know, I think talking about seeing animals, what's made the difference for snow leopards is not the fact that there may be more of them now. It's the fact that people in certain areas anyway are not harassing them. And so they feel safe in showing themselves. And, you know, I have to thank the local woman in Ladakh for showing us the way towards alleviating this human-wildlife conflict that comes from snow leopards or other predators killing their livestock. And in the case of Ladakh, it's really a change in the form of livelihood. Livelihood from being a livestock owner, trying to eke out a living in a difficult environment and having to deal with catastrophic winter storms that kill 80% of your flock, to a new livelihood that's linked more with tourism.
And it was a particular woman who began this?
Yes, we had a grant from UNESCO, Snow Leopard Conservancy and the Mountain Institute, back at the beginning of the century, actually, to take a look to see how we could improve retaining revenues to the benefit of local communities rather than to the travel agents or outsiders. And so we held a workshop and we included the woman. The government were there, and the government officials said, well, we're happy to give everybody a loan to build a lodge or a hotel. And the women were totally adamant against that. They said, no way. And the reason we don't like it is, number one, it would alter our village. We're a small village, 20 families or less. And, it's just something we don't want to do. But what we would like to do is have people be guests in our houses and do what they called homestays. And so it was really them that forged that. And we said, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it would preserve in a much better way the culture. It would give the people that came to the homestays a very personal glimpse into the life of these herders and communities.
Oh, wow. And is that the village in Hemis where people stay still, the snow leopard?
Hemis is, of course, where it all started in
Yeah.
Hemis National Park, yes. And there were several villages involved. It's since homestays are spread throughout Ladakh
Right.
now, not always linked with nature conservation or anything, but certainly linked with improved livelihoods.
Right. Interesting.
And is that also a feature of other countries, that people are going to those places for snow leopard tourism and staying in homestays and therefore bringing in money and therefore people seeing the snow leopards in different light? Or is that very much restricted to Ladakh?
Right now, it's pretty restricted to Ladakh, and I think one reason for that is the villages have a fairly nice homes, Tibetan homes, Tibetan architecture. So they're mud, stone, they're big, they have a spare room, and it's that spare room that they're then able to put a carpet in, a nice bed in, curtains, a stove to heat the place up. In Nepal, the houses are just not really amenable to holding a guest, which is partly why I think lodges are the big deal there. And plus, I think the owner of a lodge is such a huge investment, that they have to have a large return, which means they have to have multiple guests at the same time, which is what the villagers didn't want. The villagers said, we'll have multiple guests by giving all those families that have a suitable home and the willingness and interest in providing a hygienic and safe stay to villagers the opportunity to do their own homestay. So that's the way it happened. So when we've been sending trips to Ladakh every year since about 2006, and every group has seen snow leopards, sometimes up to 6 or 7 or 8 sightings even. And as a group, they've been dispersed amongst all the households, or most of the households in the village there. So everybody gets benefit. I think it was a very powerful idea, but it won't work in Nepal, partly because of what I've mentioned. It doesn't work as well in Pakistan because there, of course, the Islamic culture requires separation, and nobody can see the wife of the house. They can see the kids, no problem. Young kids, certainly not teenagers. So there it doesn't work as well. And there are other challenges, I guess, for bringing tourists to be able to see snow leopards. The key to it all, and I'm absolutely convinced of that now, seeing what is happening in other parts of India, like Spiti, with the Snow Leopard Trust working there, is that snow leopards there are now being sighted absolutely regularly every year and photographed frequently. And that's, again, because the villagers have the increased tolerance of their presence and are recognizing that they do need to protect the prey species. They do need to, discourage poaching by outsiders, etc. And in Mongolia, this is beginning to happen. So Mongolia is another option for homestays because the families in the rural areas are very widely dispersed. Typically, each valley would have 1 or 2, 3 families at most. They all have the gears, these felt tents that are absolutely incredibly. They're very comfortable. They got a wooden floor. You got actually regular mattress beds. You got a fireplace, and you can, in the middle of winter when it gets minus 30 degrees, there's no problem inside a gear, a yurt, just being in your short sleeved shirt. The challenge for Mongolia will be getting to these homestays because they would involve a vehicle journey of maybe, even 1 or 2 days. So the marketing of them is going to be dependent upon the travel agents providing that transportation at reasonable cost and making the linkages with the particular communities. They are doing that. They're doing that especially in areas where snow leopards are now being regularly sighted. But there's one thing that Mongolia really opened my eyes to it, and that was the role that shamans and sacred site guardians may have in motivating people to protect snow leopards. And we learned this by making some connections with people that were promoting traditional indigenous knowledge. And they invited us to go to the Altai Mountains of Russia and, just get a sense of how how the local communities work with and support conservation. I found out pretty quickly that snow leopards are seen as a very powerful animal, a powerful spirit, and that you have to be very careful in your relationships with them. And it was illustrated by this one family they were herders. They had a summer house out in the reserve. They would go there each year. The father would take the kids there and help with the herding of the sheep and goats. And something happened to him. He put out traps because he didn't like snow leopards killing his prey. And a snow leopard died, was killed in a trap. And a few months later, he just went crazy. he had a gun and he shot his kid. He killed one of his kids. And the village were absolutely appalled by this. And they said, well, this is not uncommon. This is why you always have to, recognize the power of that spirit, and it's better not to get into confrontation. Later in Mongolia, I was on a collaring. This is my last effort at satellite collaring back, I think it was 2008, something like that. And we were in a very remote area. It was an isolated mountain. I really wanted to know how snow leopards moved along that fragmented corridor and whether they could live in this range that was about 120, 130 square kilometers or not. Well, I took a trapper, a live trapper who worked on mountain lions, and a veterinarian to do the mobilization and trapping and train the Mongolian from the Academy of Sciences in the techniques. And I've never had a team, I've never been with a team that started to have discord growing between us. And it grew because the two foreigners really maybe weren't as culturally sensitive as they should have been, who saw three-legged dogs often, knew and heard from the herders how they hated wolves, and they set traps for the wolves killing livestock, but they were encouraged by the government to do all of this stuff. And their own dogs would sometimes get caught and lose a leg. And the herders just became convinced after we had trapped our first snow leopard, and it had escaped. Within, I don't know, a few minutes of it being trapped, it escaped. And I was flabbergasted. Why did that happen? And they, of course, were convinced that the herders had come to the trap site, seen the cat, killed it, and that was that. I said, well, there's no blood here. There's very little sign of that cat struggling. It can't have been caught very long. All cats I've ever trapped chew on the bushes and all that sort of thing around from displacement behavior. But there was none of that sign. So they rushed off and they searched up in the canyon where the tracks led to. And of course, they came back after a while having found nothing. And it took an hour or two for the trapper to say, well, I asked who had not tightened the bolt on the snare, the noose part of it. And, he was going to blame the Mongolians who was trained. I said, well, okay, who was responsible? Who tightened it? And he eventually admitted it was himself. I gotta say, I was totally flabbergasted and incredibly depressed because we only had 2 or 3 days left before we had to wind up the study and leave. And I was walking across a bare sort of slope, a really open slope, and I suddenly saw a rock that had a serpent in it, a snake in it, and it was raised, it was like, wow, who did that? And I had remembered from my trip to Russia that serpents were often the conveyors of spiritual powers and knowledge and presence. So I came back to camp, got my camera, went back out. I couldn't find that damn rock anywhere. I did a lawnmower search up and down, never found it. And so I said, okay. And I just relaxed. I said, well, if these spirits have such powerful influence on everything, maybe it'll all be different. 2 days later, literally 2 days before we were due to leave, we get a snow leopard at the very close to the last trap site, and we collared it, and it released it, and I had the villagers come down and show them it's the first time they ever touched a snow leopard, felt its deep fur alive, a cat alive, and it was a very powerful experience for us all. That cat lived for about a year, or the collar, I should say, lived for a year, and we got some incredible data from it. I think there was more. I really think there's something in the spiritual stuff. I don't know how to relate to it as a scientist, except that I know we need to consider it. We need to respect the value of indigenous elders. And it wasn't just the serpent rock. At the end of the study, the collar started to fail on us. Um, but I had some locations, and I sent the locations back to our partners in Mongolia and said, go to this place and look. They went and they said, well, there's just one big rock that's vertical, and there's no ledge on it. And there's no cat up there, no collar up there. We know. I said, well, how do you know? Well, we put the binoculars on it. I said, well, you got to climb that rock. They climbed the rock and they found the collar sitting on a ledge that literally was only about 6 inches wide. And remarkably, the antenna side was facing upward to the sky, which is the only reason we would have ever got that location. We would never have found the collar. And without the collar, we would have never had all of the locations for a whole year of it on the animal. So, what explains that? I cannot explain it.
Hmm. And when you talked about the snake, was that a painting of the snake on the rock, or was it an actual live snake?
It was actually, well, at least what I saw, maybe at this point I was under some sort of shamanic, uh, I don't know, something. I wasn't taking any drugs or anything, that's for sure. But it was a raised rock that had the markings of a viper on it, the patchwork of a viper. It was curved like a snake. It had the triangular head. It was to me a snake. It didn't move. I knew it was not a live snake for sure. I don't
Right.
know, why I couldn't find that again. I will never explain this.
So, Rodney, you established the Snow Leopard Conservancy in 2000. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Conservancy does?
Yeah, well, obviously our goal is to protect and conserve snow leopards, but our particular focus, and has been even before setting up this conservancy, is community-based stewardship of snow leopards and their habitat. And I had spent many years after our telemetry work going and training national park rangers in survey techniques, in how to mitigate livestock depredation issues and work with communities. And always, it seems, the approach was that we need scientists to go in, study it, find out what the driving forces are, and then identify solutions and convey those to the communities. And my feeling about it is that's fine, but that doesn't really cement ownership. It doesn't acknowledge the knowledge or the responsibilities, and it doesn't empower local people. It continues to treat them as servants, as some people doing the job of the government. It and the communities live in such difficult situation that they really need to have their confidence built up, that their culture is not backward, that they have a lot to offer society, and that they need to be able to do things on their own. So I push very hard, and Conservancy has done this, is involve those communities in the very beginning as co-equal partners. So we want their solutions. We actually look at what they think and how they devise a solution. And we try to look at it from the view of what is successful in their lives, what they're proud of, rather than their failures, because their failures, we're just going to not really encourage them or not give them a confidence they might need. And we find out very quickly that, what they've done is reasonable. I would have done the same thing. They've just lacked the different resources and opportunities that Western science or conservation organizations can bring to the problem. But most of all, it empowers them and it puts them as the drivers of their own lives.
And what are the estimates of snow leopards globally and the status of the species?
Yeah, very contentious. We don't really know. And I frankly think the effort to find out would require such enormous resources that meantime, the conflict between local communities and predators is only becoming more exacerbated, and that we just absolutely have to invest in solutions now and not in more research. I don't really care how many snow leopards there are. I do care, are they decreasing or increasing, or is they more or less stable? And we don't have to know how many cats there are in the world for that. We just have to study them in a couple of locations and make sure there's not a downward change in that place. And we put all these areas together with GSLIP, which is a global environmental protection plan that all 12 countries have signed into. That was a wonderful initiative started by World Bank and United Nations Development Program and others. All 12 countries have national snow leopard protection plans, and they're at the highest level, at the ministerial levels. And obviously they need to be implemented. And there is a move in there, something called PAWS, that wants to find out how many snow leopards there are. Well, doing it with camera trapping is going to be extremely difficult because, it's a remote area, the cats are sparsely distributed. There's just all sorts of challenges that are very difficult to overcome. Genetics could maybe get you there quicker, but there's a lot of problems with genetic ownership and where do you get them analyzed, the samples analyzed, etc. So I would just say I would much rather like to see the situation flipped, where instead of maybe equal going to research, going to conservation action, I would like to see 80–90% go to conservation action and for research to back off for a while, monitor, but not invest huge amounts of money and get the confidence of local communities and to protect their livelihoods or give them alternative livelihoods. Then we can have the luxury for figuring out how many we got. But I don't think the numbers have changed too much. I think we're still in the region of 4 to 7, 8,000 range wide. But I do know that wherever, let's say since around 2010, 12, when really there was this concerted global effort at protection and raising awareness in all of the range countries, that I don't think the numbers have decreased. I think there are more sightings, there are more captures and camera traps. There's at least not downward trends except in a few places. So I think we're pretty well there. And I think the move that with the red list, so as you know, snow leopards were changed from endangered to threatened. Not in 17, and that was a very, very contentious debate because a lot of conservationists, some scientists and organizations felt that, we should not be downgrading a species that was as rare as that it would make it difficult to get funding. And that's probably the crux of the red list that makes it so difficult to acknowledge success where you have it, or slow success at that, but success.
And which are the countries which have the highest populations of snow leopards? I mean, if you look at the 12 range states, which ones would you say that's where snow leopards are doing best?
By far, China. However, it's very opaque. It's not transparent. Based on habitat, and based a lot on Charlotte surveys across China, we came up with an estimate of maybe 2,000, maybe 2,500 snow leopards in China. Now, China is 60% of the total snow leopard habitat in the world, or range in the world. So it's enormous. However, China never really bought into the G-slip. So the level of research or protect or set aside of protected areas has not been as strong as the other countries. China has claimed and still claims that there are somewhere around 4,000, maybe 4,500 snow leopards in China alone, which, pushes the number up closer to that 7,500, the 7,500, I mean. We just don't know. There has been some camera trapping done. It's beginning to come up, but they have not officially released the data yet. Their report, and we're waiting for it. So China, then after China, Mongolia. Mongolia has had a slight decrease in numbers from earlier estimates, but those early estimates may have been wrong, may have been overestimated. Who knows? After Mongolia, let's see, where are we talking about? I got to think about this. I believe it might be India.
So obviously you've lived and worked in high mountains across many parts of Central Asia, and that creates all sorts of logistical issues and a fair degree of risk. What have been some of the hardest places that you've worked in?
Yeah, studying snow leopards means you really often having to visit border regions, because most snow leopards occur along the international boundaries between the 12 countries, the mountain ranges that form those boundaries. And these areas are quite sensitive and often off limits to even local scientists, let alone international. So that's been one channel. Then there's the terrain, obviously, like Longu, taking a week to walk to the study area or more. I think the most difficult thing I've ever done really is again in India with the Chadar, with a river walk when it's frozen, the Chadar ice walk. So there's a vast area of northern India called Zanskar that I think has the best snow leopard habitat in the world. It's remote, low human population density, but it's totally closed off in winter because of snowfall and, until recently, the lack of any roads. And the way that local people would get contact and send their kids to school would be to walk the Zanskar River when it's frozen. And that occurs in January and early February every year. But the river doesn't entirely freeze over. It is flowing along at probably 5 or 10 miles an hour underneath the ice. And you have a little narrow strip along the side of the very deep canyons. Your peaks, the rocks go up thousands of feet above cliffs that you can't easily traverse. So you're stuck to this little ice shelf along the edge of it with water flowing rapidly, and you don't really know how secure that ice is. And you have to walk, it's as much as 60 miles of that, 100 kilometers anyway. That's what these people had to do every year to get their supply or send their kids to school. They would go out and they would hope to lay, and they would hope that the ice is still holding by the time they come back a few weeks later or a week later. That to me was the hardest.
Yeah, those ice rivers sound terrifying.
Yeah.
And to think that my daughter complains about a 5-minute drive to school.
Rodney, I'm speechless almost. What a life you've got. You've had the sort of adventures that most people can only dream about, from shamans in Mongolia, camels in China, to walking across frozen rivers, along frozen rivers. Incredible. Charles and I talk often about this, and it comes up on the podcast often, this virtuous circle between observing and conserving. And snow leopards is, it's a classic example of a species that was the grey ghost, that was, so rare, as you said, almost impossible. And now people can see it in the DAC, and it's because of the work you've been doing, community conservation. I think this message that keeps coming up that you've explained so eloquently about working with communities, understanding the cultural practices, bringing in shamans and things as well, is critical to this. And what works in one place might not work in another, but you really understand that. I also really, as a statistician, think your point about sort of analysis paralysis is fantastic. We can keep, the tendency is so often to want to keep collecting data before doing anything. And you're saying, no, it doesn't matter how many there are, we need to start protecting them. And I think that really echoes with me. So thank you. You've given me so much to think about. I know people are going to enjoy this story, but thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely spectacular.
I agree. And I second everything that John said. Rodney, thank you so much. This has been absolutely terrific. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was wonderful. And I love your other podcasts as well.
You've been listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.